Lorna Knowles Blake is the author of Green Hill, her most recent book of poetry, and recipient of the 2017 Able Muse Award. She serves on the editorial board at the journal Barrow Street and on the advisory committee for WCAI's Poetry Sundays radio program. She teaches creative writing in Brewster on Cape Cod and in New Orleans. Welcome, Lorna.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here virtually. Hopefully next year we will be actually in person, but in the meantime, it's great to do this. It's remarkable to me how fabulously this does actually work to bring us together and share poetry. I'd like to join my thanks to Susan's, to Miles and the conference, and Mimi and the conference sponsors, and also to thank her and Jennifer and the vast array of interns and administrators who make this possible. Really, it's amazing, the support that we get. So I wanted to start off, my husband and I divide our time between New Orleans and Cape Cod, and we were fortunate when the pandemic began to shelter at our home in Cape Cod. We didn't really expect to be there as long as we have been. And we experienced at least 2 seasons that we don't usually experience while we sheltered in place there. And also during the time that I was in the Cape, I was involved and fortunate to be included in an anthology of poems of place, Cape Cod and the islands and the South Shore. So I wanted to, because I was so grateful to have this place to shelter, this beautiful place, I wanted to read 4 poems that kind of correspond with the seasons on the Cape. So I'll start with what passes for spring, but Cape Cod doesn't really have a spring. It's more like an extended mud season, and then we're suddenly in summer. So this is called Intertidal. Twice a day the pageantry repeats. High tide eddies out, leaving hard-packed sand, the bay's debris, twined in marsh grass. Under driftwood, treasure abounds. So too the forgotten plastic shovel, broken bottle, flip-flop sandal from Brazil. How far it has traveled in tendrils of seaweed, motion of moon, water, delivering bones, stones, shells of snails and crabs and clams. Some cracked, some translucent, intact, waiting for the next inhabitant. Whelk, periwinkle, hermit crab. I too feel like an eremite. One cold morning, I fail to find anything I've lost in the rack, despite my silent search. Give me, strike that, fetch up a sign, any sign. And then moving along to a summary poem. Like riding a bicycle on the water. This is called On Rivet Creek. We were not quite lost that Sunday morning, 2 hours of high tide left, as the water began its alchemy from salt to mineral, luring us into bosky silence, small choirs in the pine trees, a breeze ruffling the cordgrass, waves slapping against the shore. Each turn compelled us farther. We let ourselves go with the water, forward. Without charts, the looping ribbon of creek became both route and destination. Houses tucked into the marsh drowse behind drawn shades, indifferent to us. Shorebirds ignored us, busy with their own tasks and hungers, and past the last bend or the next to last, past the osprey nesting station, just before the cemetery, bells rang. And if you were to die today or leave me, if memory is all we ever have of eternity, this is the moment I'd choose to remember. A green hereafter of sunlight and pealing bells. Paddles raised, kayaks slowly pirouetting in the sun, we floated, listening long after the last echo's faint splash, until the tide carried us on its backward journey to the bay. And then usually every September we are packing up to leave and come down south to a very different kind of shore. Everybody jokes that we have two places that are on beaches and shores that will not exist in 5 years' time. So we'll see. We're still here. Wash ashores. September, and the gardens blown and bolted. Wren and finch have flown down south, and the sun sets further down the bay each passing night. We hate the thought of leaving, contemplate alternatives, as if this bright and ample season could endure beyond the calendar's secure curfew. But Labor Day is here, and autumn is ready to sue for possession. What do? Procrastinate, then pack and go. My books, your music, linen clothes, and one more summer is foreclosed upon by rituals such as these. Stacking canoes and wicker chairs, arguing over small repairs required by weather or the years. Where is the pulse of a home? What is the soul of a house, that marriage of dwelling and spirit? Perhaps it's in the flow of tide, a herring gull's suspended glide, the constant birdsong in the shade reminding us, you are, you are. Then just before we load the car, the house fills with the airy fire of sunset, and we shroud the place in bedding, a green-sprigged embrace of percale and flannel and fleece. Is it love, I wonder, when we're done, or time we're shielding from the sun beneath these sheets that we slept on? This next poem is written in a somewhat eccentric meter called Alcaics. I think you'll hear it. I don't really want to have to explain it, but it's kind of a downward meter. Winter, Rock Harbor. Mile long, a gleaming white slag of glacial sea, salt ice. The beach today an expanse more like snowcap or permafrost. Seductive, though I'm aware of the danger. Flows will break up, despite their solid appearance. Still, life churns beneath in currents that only seem landlocked. A trick of winter ocean weather. Now come, it calls. Walk on water. Change elements. A January blizzard has freeze-framed the two of us on this spectral bay. Wild, cold, and glorious. Tidal flats, we rambled for miles, all those careless summers. My conferees and I have been talking a lot about what we read during the pandemic and how that might have influenced what we were writing or reading, and the reading that influences our writing. And it's interesting that several people have returned to myth, and specifically the Odyssey, and really the ancient texts like the Bible and the Odyssey and Shakespeare. So I thought I would read a few myth poems and then end up with the inevitable muse poem for a poetry reading. This is called Expedition. In Anatolia, at the ancient tell of his Sarlik, Heinrich Schliemann spent long days on a cape at the mouth of the Dardanelles under a white delirious sun, the grit sharp as diamonds aching between his teeth. The patient rhythm of the sieves, a shimmering mirage of evidence, glinting from every potsherd and ruined tool. Archaeology cannot disprove our myths, nor prove them. Pack up the dusty shovels, picks and headlamps, roll up the scorched maps and frayed charts. Troy still exists in each of us because of Homer. It's in the Iliad, not buried under eddying centuries of wind-swept sand. And we have a fair amount of mother-daughter poems too, and so I thought I would read this modern take on Persephone. Persephone in Manhattan. Checks that mother is asleep on a sofa garden of chintz, book still open, tea cold. Sneaks out of the apartment, streaks past doorman, dog walker, corner panhandler, rushing to dim the glare of her green sunlit potential. She crosses against the light to a forbidden entrance, leading down to places night blooming, fluorescent. Danger holds the door for her, sweet escort to that nether city of dark caverns, smoke-filled bars, clubs where she, greedy, samples the shiny garnet seeds, seeds of the world's pulpy fruit. How can she now return to you, to your yellow fields and flowers, to your blooming, tangled love? One more myth poem. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the Odyssey. It's in Book 5, Ino's Vale, the story of Ino's Vale. Rising from her salty underwater cave, she spread her scarf, recalling all the times it had been a tree, whose branches collected her, nested and singing. How, under her slim white ankles, it had become a stairway, cloud or pillow on the water, a scroll of verses, written with a feather dipped in the sea. While at other times the veil was glassy as a mirror, or gossamer as a spider's web, always transforming what it reflected or caught. She watched it twirl on the air and drape itself over her shoulders. And then, with a snap of her wrist, she cast the veil upon the waves to save Odysseus from the sea god. I think this has been just such a hard time for so many people, and it has been so, especially in recent months, you think it's over, it's not over, it's hard to pick yourself up and start over. This is just called Phoenix. Harder and harder, cinders in her plumage, ashes in her craw, the exhilaration of the rise, dragged down by the cold stone of experience, blinding sun in her eyes, headwind, updraft, squall, the next fateful drop, the next dreadful fall. And I'll conclude with another funny little form called an obligato. It's just fun. And this is called, I named it the title of the form. But I will close with this, since we're all here hoping to find the muse. She must be very busy because we're all looking for her and hoping for a date, right? So, what makes a poet feel the urge, ode or dirge, perverse desire to amuse? The muse, whose whispers make those words collide, will decide. You are her captive groom or bride, just married to the whims that she indulges. Could be elegy, ode, or dirge. The muse will decide. Thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce our next poet, Sally Bliumis-Dunn. Sally's poems have appeared in the New York Times, the Paris Review, PBS NewsHour, Plume, Poetry London, Prairie Schooner, Rattle, the American Academy of Poets Poem a Day, and Ted Kuzer's American Life and Poetry. In 2002, she was a finalist for the Nimrod Hardman Pablo Neruda Prize, and her third book, Echolocation, which is really wonderful, was published by Plume Editions Mad Hat Press in March of 2018, and was shortlisted for the Eric Hoffer Award, a long list finalist for the Julie Sook Award, and runner-up for the Poetry by the Sea Best Book Award. She is an associate editor at large for Plume. But, as E.B. White wrote in Charlotte's Web, Sally is both a good writer and a true friend. Please welcome Sally Bliumis-Dunn.
Oh, thank you, Lorna, so much. I'm thrilled to be here again with old friends, and it just feels like coming home, albeit virtually. And Miles, I've been friends with you for, over 24 years, and Mimi, and I just am feeling really grateful that we're all together. And thank you, Lorna. I'm going to start with a poem that's quite old. I wrote it just after 9/11, hearing the names of those who had perished on the radio read. And I'm reading it now in honor of those we've lost in these last couple years due to COVID. Their names. Like a rain I feel but cannot see, the names of the dead falling. Silences I hear between first names, middle, last, are slivers of empty air between lines of rain. I want to be in these tiny silences that cannot hold their deaths, but join them to all silence. Rests in a piece of music, the quiet beneath a rock, the feather on a crow, beak closed, wings perfectly still. This next poem, Northern Flickr, my husband and I were lucky enough to have seen one once in Maine. They're quite beautiful. And I'm thinking of it as the opening poem for another collection. So I'll try it out here. Northern Flickr. I wish I could trade places with that bird. I'd slip into its elegant pattern of polka dots, some of them fading as into the folds of a fine silk blouse. On top of the flicker's fine-boned head, a flare of blue, like the tea hat my mother wore on Easter Sundays. I'd gladly place it on my head and trill her hallelujahs, if I could trust once more what she used to tell me, that if we could all just be good, we would suffer less. In these bright lit times, I am drawn to the flicker's name, the momentary dimming that it brings to mind as when a hand passes close to a dinner candle. The brightest light during these last 2 years of the pandemic has been my daughter Angie and son-in-law Brett have a baby, and I'm a grandma. So I'll read a couple poems about that. After winter solstice. Because you are pregnant, the days grow rounder with light. The long oaks bend towards each other as through a glass orb. Loose blouses like snowdrifts. I wish I had sung to you more when you were inside me and carried you less like a marriage I knew was failing. I wish I could have kept my mind in the same place as my body. This year, the winter will not drag on. I will measure the slowly accruing light and your changing form. Who knows what settles as I watch you slice the peaches? Maybe a future entomologist's fingers are finding their first meticulous rhythm. Maybe the delicate register of your child's voice is gathering its notes. Kitchen visit. The purple carrot's taste does not live up to its exotic appearance. Handsome is as handsome does, is what my grandmother would have said, though likely not about a carrot. Dead for 40 years, she arrives, this time in her blue print dress with the large front pockets that never served as pockets, though she always let me look inside. Frost laces our front window, and a single moth blinks like a human eye. The pane of glass between us. The purple carrot on the counter cannot account for why my grandmother appears, now as a moth on the window, and later as knitted sweaters folded in my closet, just the way she taught me. First the arms towards the heart, and then the waist folding up to the neck of sweater, like the impossible pose in yoga She is holding for me now, as only a ghost can, inhabiting my pregnant daughter, herself a yoga teacher. I can sense her there, looking out at me from the womb where her first great-grandchild grows. The next four poems have a kind of unease, some pandemic, some global warming. And this particular poem is called Purple Carrot. A minor character in the poem before and now gets the title role, Purple Carrot. These are lonely times. No sweetness lingers on the tongue from this carrot's purple flesh. Still, the violet discs I slice into the soup are pleasing. They sink like coins that have no worth, except that I imagine them on a fountain's marble bottom. I am 4 or 5, and my grandmother is showing me her white paper boats. Folded small, pressed flat, she lifts them from her pocket. They do not look like boats until she opens up the folds, and they hold space that moves with them along the silver water to where I am standing now in my kitchen, purple carrot in my hand. This one is called Weather Report, and we had a hurricane in New York for the first time a few years ago, and it was really sort of an eerie phenomenon to have one up here. So this is called Weather Report. Before the hurricane, the pewter air is still as the pewter mugs on the kitchen shelf in the house where we were raised. They were not used a single time, though once I took one down to feel its heft and was surprised to see the bottom was made of glass, like a diver's mask. And so I held it to my eyes and looked out at our kitchen through the mug's dusty window, which dulled the red linoleum counter, made it seem distant, like someone else's kitchen. And out my window now, the air sits motionless as a child in a chair, overcome by sadness. Her feet do not touch the ground. They hang perfectly still. And the tall maples seem unfamiliar, as though they had secretly unhitched or were unhitching from what we know of trees. I think during the pandemic, I've always been someone who loves nature and feels very close to it, but that relationship was intensified. This is called Birches. I walk the rough stone driveway, and from their long white trunks, brighter than winter air, I sense their dark eyes watching, motionless, without judgment, as when taking something fully in. I know these eyes are wounds healed over or scars from branches fallen, and I know the language between us is untranslatable. But for the entire 3-mile hike, I sense their eyes behind me, holding me as I might hold an overfull glass of water, meniscus trembling in the white winter sky, as they look on with great precision, measure me as I go smaller by the mailbox, letter in my hand. And though at a great distance, I can feel them taking in the loops and dips in the black script of the address and its return, as I might observe without distinction the wreaths of moss around their trunks if I were focusing on something else or everything at once. Buttercup. I could not stop touching their petals, slippery and bright as though wet like the terrace stones lit by rain, the day our father fell and hit his head, hurrying the picnic guests inside. How many buttercups did I destroy that summer, rubbing their slick petals free of gloss and color? I was 5. Yellow had been the sun, a lemon, my friend Polly's gold blonde hair. In bed before sleep, I'd imagine the clattering of bingo balls and the metal barred globe my brother would spin, though in truth, the house was quiet, except for the sometimes scritch of squirrel on our old slate roof. The rock where we warmed ourselves after swimming in the brackish pond, our skin strung with water beads and bits of algae like witch's hair, was related now to the rock that slammed a blood clot into Father's brain, which I could not envision. What I saw was a red balloon, like the one in that sad story, the soft spiral of its white string as it slipped from Pascal's hand. And I'm going to read 2 more poems. This is called Beaked Whale. Beak as in a bird's beak, it's just a kind of whale. Beaked Whale. Not buoyed by the ocean, its own weight will crush its lungs and heart, just a matter of time. We wait for the rescue sling and high tide to return. The few of us crowded in the enormous stench, the whale hauling air inside the diminishing holds of its lungs. Low tide, and all we hear is the whale's terrible breathing, its body drying out, except near its blowhole, which spews a few droplets on each exhalation and makes the round vent shine like a tiny halo. Other than that, the whale lies on the sand, long and dark, with small white bursts that look like distant stars. And for one moment, this beaked whale becomes a window onto some other galaxy before there were humans to watch a creature die. And this last poem, I'll just say quickly, Naomi Shihab Nye has a project where she asks poets from Ford and 97 to write poems addressing the vaccine. So this was my attempt. Thanks everybody for listening. Dear Vaccine, I am watching the nurse lift the small vial of you clear as any cloudless sky. Because we have the cow to thank for your name, dear Vaccine, I am picturing 4 or 5 red Angus in a long grassed field, unfettered as the few good decisions I have made. The nurse lifts the syringe, dabs my arm, and there's one cow in particular standing by the weather-worn post and rail fence, the kind that lined the fields of my childhood. And this bovine's eyes shine like the pond where we dunk ourselves to ease the sweltering days, lying afterwards side by side on the warm granite slab. Dear Vaccine, I remember one afternoon when Lila nearly drowned, and Father dove in, dove down, and pulled her up, blued but coughing. And we all cried with the kind of relief we had never felt before. I watched the nurse, and I thanked her, and thanked her, and thanked her once more. Thanks so much. It's my pleasure now to introduce Nicole Brown. Nicole and I have been teaching together at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival for the last at least 7 years, I think. We've shared many animated dinners, planned birthday surprises for Miles, sat in countless front rows in the Crest Theater, oohing and eyeing as we listened to the parade of dazzling readers. With a poet as talented as Nicole, it is hard to pick and choose from her many accomplishments in the bio, but here goes. Nicole Brown is the author of Sister and Fanny Says, Her poems have appeared in the New York Times, the Oxford American, Poetry International, the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, and the Best of American Poetry in 2017. Currently, she lives in Asheville, North Carolina, where she volunteers at several animal sanctuaries. When I wrote to Nickole to get a sense for what she'd be reading for you tonight, she wrote back with her characteristic warmth, "Hello, dear one. Not sure what I'm going to read, but will likely include a handful of poems about a cancer scare. I'm still trying to process that dark lonely." There are so many qualities to admire in Nickole's work. Here's just one. Nickole does not write about animals from the distance that could easily be fueled by her capacious mind's research. When she writes, her research serves to widen and deepen her direct experience with these animals. Here are a few lines from her poem Scare, which, if we're lucky, she'll read for us tonight, of the rhinoceros. His caretaker said, "No worries, he won't bite down." And sure enough, I placed my hand in the daunting socket of his mouth, and inside it was sweetly pink and warm. And here's another aspect of Nickole's work I'd like to note. I was taken with these lines, which point to the intimacy of this writer's voice with the English language. Here's Nickole's description of the word scare, though I think it could apply to any word in the language to which she chooses to write. Oops. Anyway, but this is what she says about scare. "But listen, the word is a call, an amniotic skin peeled off a newborn so she can breathe." And I too admire the surety of Nickole's tone. The same poem begins, "Let me tell you," which reads at once as an earnest asking of permission to speak and to an urgency pressing behind that need. And so with great pleasure tonight, we will all listen to Nickole Brown. Welcome.
Sally, thank you so much. And thank you for your beautiful new poems, I too, I've been coming to the festival for years now, and it's become a home for me. And not being there with you guys in person is one of the aches, the big aches of this time. And I don't know about you, but I wait all year for January so that I can reset myself and I can remember what it's all about and set my intentions for my writing life. But I'm really grateful that we can at least hold this space. That said, I do want to open with a poem that's not by me. And I've never done that before, but I think it's important. It's a short poem. It's called "To the Poets." I have lined up my servants on bookshelves. I work for them. They serve me well. They welcome me in quiet and tumult, even in death's company. They humble me. They make me in their imagery. I am their paper mache. Their hands are all over me as I reach out to them. I steal their songs. I am a felon on parole. They gave me life. They have pardoned me. And that poem is by Miles Kuhn. And for those of you unfamiliar, he is the founder of this festival. He's kept it running for almost 2 decades now. And Miles, I just want to let you know that your work and your dedication have given me life, because this festival, through the many years I have been here, has been my home, has been my literary education. So, and I'm also going to put in the chat for you here a little treat for you after this reading. This is an interview with Miles Kuhn and the poet Laure-Anne Bosselaar, in which he talks about the founding of the festival and his work and whatnot. And it's a real treat. So take some time with it if you can. So I'm just going to read one poem tonight. It is it's a long one, so, but just one. I swear, just one. And Sally, thank you for opening my subject matter up for me, because I am in so many ways. You might see a woman in a woman's body sitting here, but I'm really just a bag of marbles in a wig. I am full of so many little benign cysts and fibroids and myxomas and gliomas, and just have been dealing with this my whole life. And during the pandemic, I discovered a 16 centimeter tumor that was really quite the scare, and I had it removed during lockdown, which was really hard. So I had to go into the hospital on my own, and it was an extended death meditation under a death meditation. And I've had a lot of time to think about cancer, and I've had a lot of time to think about the body and how precious it is. So that said, this poem might just entail every trigger warning you can imagine. I do apologize. So just turn off the sound and come back in 8 minutes. All right. It's called Anthem. Cancer, let me. Cancer, let me sing you. Cancer, let me sing you a song, lullaby up a coin's throw of syllables that spangle the well, a copper shimmer of wishes beneath water dark and cold. Let me sing Elise. Let me sing Eva. Eva, Elise, Elise and Eva, Eva, Elise, Elise, Eva, Eva. You hear those nectared vows? Never before had I friends called by such honey-soaked syllables, but now, thanks to you, if I call those names, no one would answer, at least no one alive. What? You don't like the dirt taste of dirge? Well, how about I hum the tune of Jamie? Remember him? Or how about Alita, Thomas, Jason, Jerry, John? Any of those ring a bell? Or should I take you further back, seeing the names erased when I was just a kid, new to you, like dear Miss Klein? Hers was the first skull I saw green up from its face. Or my grandmother. I was 12 and barely knew her first name, but you bloomed her ovaries blue so quick I hardly found time to say Wilma, much less say goodbye. Or let's recall that man who, after you had your way with him, he lost his words. Hungry, he asked me for lunch a ham salmon with pinchers on the side. He was a songwriter before you got to him, you thief, you marauder. And before you trashed what was left, his ankles were big round as his thighs. They split and wept and could hardly prop him up that last time he stood on stage, humiliated in house shoes cut open to fit his football-sized feet. So cancer, I'm done. I'm through gagging down funeral casseroles and sweating in black, trying to be such a good girl. I'm gut sick with you, always scratching at my door. Now it's over. Now it's just me and you. Come on, come here. I jump in the pit, mosh to that old punk riff. Those are people who died. Those are people who died. They were all my friends and they died. Now you want to dance with me? Don't try to hide. I know you hear me. I'd like to take you outside, do some damage to your throat, like it's to strip your fine gray suit and shame you in a hospital gown that won't close in the back, like to snatch your head bald with 6 rounds of chemo and 20 more to go, like to bruise your arms with IV needles, shank your chest with a port. So there, it's out. Here we go. Are you listening? Can you hear me now? Cancer, fuck you. That's right. Fuck you and the horse you rode in on. Your pre-dawn pesticides and puffed up plastic treats. Fuck the black lung sucked in from your seams of coal. And fuck that cowboy, a friend of yours, I'm sure, who thought it cute to gun his truck and leave me in a carbon cloud rough-necked from his tricked-out exhaust. Fuck your cigarettes, all those elegant and useless Hepburn filters my grandmother used, the other grandmother, all the time she double-tapped her manicured finger over a crystal ashtray, the nicotine sheen I cleaned from chandeliers over our heads. You took her with tendrils greasy brown and bloated blue, and for that I will never forgive you. And that water made especially for you, draining off the malignant machinery of our towns. Fuck that too. All our smoke stacks and processing plants and farms gone factory that cram pigs in so tight there is a lake of shit 3 city blocks long a man could fall into and drown. Fuck your tumors that grow unnoticed until, like wisteria up through a rain gutter, you cracked that man's spine. Or as you did my great aunt, you stopped cold what was in her bowels, forced it back up through her mouth. Fuck the panic that rises up in me every time I touch the dense flesh of my own breast. All 6 biopsies marking 6 dark hours on that ludicrous clock I check obsessively with my hands. All 6 scars marking mere frights, benign lumps, harmless, but there to keep me close to you. That first scare, the worst, a crescent moon botched around my right nipple, stitched when I was only 16. My body so new, but already yours. And fuck the fear in that pretty actress who, after learning what her genes had in store, demanded her doctor remove both of hers. Fuck the teeth you've loosened, spit out like corn, and fuck what you did to my son-loving uncle, still going fishing every Wednesday, but with half a nose. Fuck you for sneaking paint under that artist's fingernail and taking his hand, and fuck you for that red knot of mucus in the baby's diaper, how her mother laughed at first, thinking it must be a silly, sick joke. Fuck your chemo brain. How my stylish friend drew on 2 lopsided brows, and fuck your pain patches and sutures and pills. Lost are we in your labyrinth of words, each of your ugly offspring an arrogant blast, given titles Latinate, hard to pronounce, some even beautiful, named like a queen. Hail, hail, astrocytoma, ruler supreme of the spinal cord with her star-shaped sails. Blessed be neuroblastoma, that little-known god who yanked my young cousin out of preschool and Zeused her into a weeping willow, a stand of ditch lilies, a brown mouse. Step into the fields, see if you can find her. Who could ever find that baby girl now? Who knows where she went? And fuck each of your kissing cousins too. One at the hospital who billed me $600 to flip my pillow and glance at my chart. Another who apathetic answered the call station, answering for my social before my name. The one who said, your insurance plan states this is beyond the allowable amount. And fuck that intake nurse too, who couldn't even spell benign when taking my history, saying, I'm sorry, we just don't hear that word around here so much. Fuck your 5-year milestones, because like a husband who beats his wife with an extension cord, she might escape but will glance in her rear view for life. And fuck those snaking tubes. One for the slow drip of that toxic fix that got its start as mustard gas in the foot-rot trenches of World War I. Another for intubation that, once removed, gores a throat so raw it cannot speak for hours. If this is an anthem, I place my hand across the beating left of my heart. I pledge allegiance to cells that grow and give up and move on when they should. I hawk you up and spit you out. I fire up a cauldron of spells, wicked witch myself a fortress of thorns, switch on a fence so electric it sparks in fog. And when that doesn't work, I'm not above begging. Please, somebody, fix this. Do anything, just anything. I simply want to grow old. I just want to be left with a body that can keep what it works hard to make. Want to love what's intact. Want every worn out organ and wiry gray accounted for and buried together all at once. I just want to die, as I must, as we all must, but die without you on our fucking own. I have a mug of bourbon that's waiting for me after this. I don't know if you do too. Thank you guys for listening. So now I have the pleasure of introducing somebody maybe I've seen every now and then. Her name is Jessica Jacobs, and she is the author of Take Me With You, Wherever You're Going, which was winner of the Devil's Kitchen and Goldie Awards, and Pelvis with Distance, which won the New Mexico Book Award and was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. She serves as chapbook editor for Beloit Poetry Journal and lives in Asheville, North Carolina. What do you know? I do too. And she lives with me, which is so exciting. And we've co-authored a book called Write It, 100 Poetry Prompts to Inspire. And we also offer free online generative writing sessions every month. And y'all are welcome to come to any of those that you ever want to. They're kind of fun. They're kind of kooky. And what's really exciting, and she just sent it 2 days ago. She has a brand new collection of poems. And I have seen it and I have felt the weight of it, and it's really exciting. And it's in conversation with the book of Genesis. And it's really, I think it's pretty great. But that'll be out from Four Way Books in 2024. And so please won't you welcome my relentless mule of a wife, the June to my Johnny, or maybe the Johnny to my June, the honeybee circling my Coke, my best reader, my witness, the love of my life, Jessica Jacobs. Yay!
Hello, thank you. It's a little hard to read after this poem. Thank you, Nicole. That was a beautiful introduction. And thank you, all of you. I was just kind of looking back over the last 8 years, which is when I married Nicole, and when also apparently marrying her means I got to come to the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. And it has just been, I mean, the marriage was the best part, but I think that's like second best. So Miles and Mimi, thank you. You have built just such an incredible family of poets, and especially the women that I'm fortunate enough to read with tonight. So I have been really struggling with the question of free will, among other things, in grappling with the book of Genesis. And I wasn't sure how to write about it until we had a friend who came over who's an evolutionary biologist. And he started telling us about this totally crazy experiment his lab was doing that involved punching bags and cadaver arms. And what they discovered was that, yes, our hands evolved, thumb and forefinger, for precision motion, but also it evolved to make us really good at punching stuff. So, free will. Free will is in our hands, in these bones lashed by ligaments, sheathed in skin. Flex your fingers wide, like folding fans collapse them in. Muscle-less puppets, they are merciless or tender depending on what moves them. We can train a single finger to hold a body's weight, all 10 together to summon a sonata, birth a baby, ball into clubs, and beat a man to death. We tatters of lace and crafters of skyscrapers are the only animals who can make a fist. How much simpler if our bodies' weapons were separate, obvious as antlers. Yet the Talmud speaks of Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, as the source of all creativity and desire, the same urge, a spur to make love and take someone without consent, for righteous anger and violent rage. Like the rabbis, some states define a deadly weapon only after the fact, by the damage a thing caused. Like a break is both an opportunity and a fracture, cleave to hold fast and split apart our hands. These broken hymns of contronyms, capable of such cruelty and also grace, hard chosen. And one of the things about which we have to really make some choices is the climate crisis, because so often it's the countries that are least able to deal with the horrible things that are being wrought right now, from storms to climate refugees, are happening to countries that don't have the means to deal with it. And so the choices that we make as Americans affect everyone else, just like the pandemic. And the story of Noah and the flood really helped me to think about that. And the thing that you might need to know is just that the Hebrew word teva, which is normally translated as ark, also can mean word. Collective nouns. When Noah was still just a man and not yet sailor and savior, God said, "Make yourself a word, for I have decided to silence all flesh." Scraping muscle from a hide, his wife crouched nearby, listening. Without argument or question, without a single signal of warning to neighbors or friends, her husband, that little wind-up toy, God's docile errand boy, complied. He built the word to spec, big enough to hold two of every creature, but too small for her mother, too small for her brother, no matter how she begged. From planks of gopher wood smeared with pitch, Noah built the word, and God shut them up in it. Water crushed down from the sky, fountained from the seas, dissolving living dust and breath to reefs of hushed mud. And he, a silent man, in a wooden word drifting the silenced world. With an otter placid as a stole across his shoulders, instead of talking, he lived in his hands, picking knits, troughing food and water, always more water, tending to every walking, creeping, winged thing, to all beings but her. Never lying beside her, never tasting the taste of sleep. His tongue withered to a husk. The dark hold was mobbed with chitter, roar, and screech without refrain, and from outside the ceaseless babble of wood and rain. She was drowning in languages she couldn't speak, and he never offered her a word of comfort. When the rains finally ended, Noah bound a rope to the rafters. Before the raven, before the doves, he lowered himself from the word's one window. A splash, and he leashed the rope to his ankle. Leaned back and let his hands fall empty, let the flood embrace him. Grime sloughed from him into the waves until the only animal he smelled was himself. Noah bobbed there, a beaming buoy, tethered to the word in which the future floated, where his wife, unseen, the new Eve, humanity's unnamed mother, looked out from the window and watched him give himself to the killing waters, looked past him, trying not to think of the death and rot that brothed him. Is a man good, she wondered, who can construct a word large enough for only a chosen few? And now, regardless of any covenant that once rainbowed the sky, before the world is again silenced, the water and weather already rising, what noun collective, what peaceful fleet lashed by syntax and spring lines into a sentence of survival, what new words can we build to save us all? So part of my research has been teaching myself very, very badly biblical Hebrew. And I am kind of a word nerd, so I've been very excited about this, especially all of the tenses that exist in biblical Hebrew that do not exist in English. And one of those is not just future perfect, but something called prophetic perfect. And grammar texts are generally super boring, so I thought I would write a poem to explain what that is. Elegy in prophetic perfect. Like God saying, "You have entered the ark," before Noah cut a single plank, or saying at Sinai, "I make this covenant with those here and those not here, as in with those to come." A promise transcending the present. It's the tense of done and dusted, of bet your ass and bottom dollar, of here now, though not quite yet. Like Joseph saying to a prosperous Pharaoh, and there were 7 years of famine, as though he'd already seen that devastation, already heard the pleading in the streets. A vision of the future so certain it's already past. Like my mother, decades before she would forget her own name, or the fact she'd had children, saying, "You'll miss me when I'm gone." How long before? To move in the wet heat of Florida summer is to be carried in the mouth of an animal. But inside my parents' house, kept chill as a mausoleum, my mother paces and weeps in a ragged nightgown she refuses to change. Her hands two anxious dishcloths trying to wring themselves dry. Because I am not the person I'd like to be, I shut the door on this, on my father's poor job of pretending not to cry. And between fences draped in air potato vines, beetle-eaten to a path of tattered valentines, run as though I could leave any of this behind. As Joseph tried to when he named his first son Manasseh, he who makes forgetting, a word that hints at memory evaporating like water from a sizzling street, that heat hungry as the silverfish swimming my childhood books, leaving holes in all the old stories. But to name someone after what you say you've forgotten is to make of them a neon arrow to the relentless past, one you'll someday return to. This is not that. The mother I've lost is lost for good. The only cure for such decay is its completion. When she's forgotten, even forgetting. In the mountains I've made my home, vine barrens of kudzu, invasive as her illness, mask every gall, burl, and blight. So come, high climber, you foot a night vine. May all her buried memories remain for her unmarked, unnamed. Cover it all with your nullifying green. Be a sea that waves over everything. And if it brings her peace, let her forget even me. So thank you very much. And it is now my absolute honor and pleasure to introduce to you Angela Narciso Torres. And I had the delight of reading with her at the end of last year. And most people, when they get sick, especially with something like COVID, you know, they cough a lot. Maybe they binge like some silly Netflix shows. She wrote some really stunning poems, a poem a day. So that's the person you are about to hear. She is the author of What Happens Is Neither from Four-Way Books, To the Bone from Sundress Publications, and Blood Orange from Willow Books. Her recent work appears or is forthcoming in Poetry, Poetry Northwest, and Prairie Schooner. She is a graduate of Warren Wilson's MFA program for writers and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And she received first prize in the Yeats Poetry Prize from the W.B. Yeats Society of New York. Born in Brooklyn and raised in Manila, she currently resides in San Diego, and she serves as a senior and reviews editor for Rhino Poetry. So you are in for a treat. Please welcome Angela.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica, for that lovely and kind and generous introduction, and for your pensive and yet large-hearted poems, which never fail to inspire me. Thanks to all my gifted co-readers, Lorna, Sally, Nicole, for those breathtaking readings. I'm still trying to catch my breath after those readings. You all inspire me so much every time we read together. And this is my fourth time coming back here. And like others have said already, it's a homecoming. It's a great way to start the new year, to be here in your light and to see your lovely faces and hear your words and to see everyone's beautiful faces. Well, we can't see you now, but I know you're out there in the ether. Thank you also to all who made this lovely family, this community possible: Miles, Mimi, Susan, Jen, Marcy, and all the interns and staff, not just for the hard behind the scenes work that not all of us can see, but also for the heart work that goes into making this festival a gathering like no other. I'm just so honored and so grateful to be a part of it and to be here. So my recent book, What Happens Is Neither, is both an homage and an elegy to my parents, whom I lost 2 years ago now, my mother to Alzheimer's and my father 11 days later to cancer. And writing the book was my way of processing the grief from this devastating loss and to grapple with the question of how we reconstruct ourselves after such loss through the consolations of nature, of ritual, of memory. In the book, I also explore the idea of reinventing the self in several self-portraits, and I'll read one of them. This one is based on my parents' ritual of praying the rosary together every night before bedtime, something they did even until their last days. Excuse me. Self-portrait as rosary beads. Curled amid lint and loose change, tucked in a jacket's satin lining, or crushed with used gum in seams of denim, I've known pain clinics and airports, taxi cabs and stale schoolrooms where time is a honeycomb in winter. I am olive wood, carnelian, plastic, black onyx. I'm rosebuds pressed into fragrant spheres. Your heat is my musk, your worry my fire. Pick your mystery. If Tuesday sorrowful, if Saturday glorious, I've held you in grocery lines, picket lines, the hours between sleepless and woken. Hold me. I'm glass shattered, smoothed by my mother's nerves, pillowed beneath her cheek. Counted, accountable, counting, counted on. Crystallized, dangled on a string or hung from a mirror in a river of traffic. Praying for green, for an end, for a mutiny of rain. Litany of sorrows, of praise, I'm a crown of roses, a crown of purple thorns. I'm faithful as breadcrumbs on barbed wire. Lose me to birds or to night's starred thicket. Touch and be splintered, soothed, sundered, surrendered. My scent on your fingertips. So I join you now from north of San Diego, where we're having a warm spell after several weeks of cooler weather and rain. I know I have no right to complain when it's 50s and 60s here, and some of you are in winter and real winter with snow and everything. But I wrote this when I was living in Chicago and when a warm spell in February really was reason to celebrate. Warm spell, February. For the first time in weeks, the wind doesn't cut like an insult. My dog feels it too. I slacken her leash so she can dig her nose in the wet underbrush, letting her sniff as long as she likes. A woman walking on a San Francisco beach once told me, we must give them time, meaning the dog, snout deep in tangled seaweed. To them, it's like reading a good book. Somewhere I read Haruki Murakami trained for marathons the way he writes, pushing his legs to the next mile like he pushed his pen to the end of one sentence and then the next. Today, I'm in no rush. I tread slowly, sipping the air the way the Pacific Ocean swallowed our brown bodies just outside Manila, our mothers waving us back to steamed rice, fried fish, mango on a stick. Why do I remember? Would I think of this now if the air weren't soft with last night's showers, warm as a mother's breast? Would I dare to say, the twigs are chandeliered with rain like pearls from a girl's ear? I breathe. For the first time in weeks, I return to my skin. My dog is down here and she heard me say walk and dog and she started like shaking her collar thinking I was gonna give her a walk. Not yet, Phoebe, in a couple minutes. I have a couple more poems to share. These are newer, they're not in the book. The first one is a semi-cento, which intersperses lines from the writings of a psychoanalyst and pediatrician whom I studied in another life when I was training to be a child psychologist. This was before I made the career shift into poetry. His name is D.W. Winnicott, and he developed a concept known as the good enough mother. And he says, the good enough mother is one who makes active adaptation to the infant's needs, an adaptation that gradually lessens according to the infant's growing ability to tolerate frustration. In this poem, I'll be alternating between my own words and lines from Winnicott's theoretical work, Playing and Reality. The good enough mother. Lying beside my mother, I learned stillness. The child is only alone in the presence of someone. She made me keep vigil when father worked late. Fear of breakdown is the fear of a breakdown that has already been experienced. On starched sheets, I waited for her madcap heart to slow, her forehead to uncrease. Tell me what you fear, and I will tell you what has happened to you. I tried not to sneeze, got scolded for making the bed creak. The normal child, if she has confidence in mother and father, pulls out all the stops. I pretended we were playing hide and seek. It is a joy to be hidden and disaster not to be found. I learned the way of pebbles, saffron-robed priests, rice fields. The alternate to being is reacting. Reacting interrupts being and annihilates. I became immovable, unfazed by wind or rain. So as Jessica mentioned earlier, back in October, I tested positive for a breakthrough case of COVID-19, and it was a long recovery. And I'm just now feeling a semblance of normalcy in my body and in my just emotional state after having gone through that. During my recovery, as she mentioned, a friend and I started exchanging poems daily, and it was such a comfort to wake up to new poems every day from my friend Lucia, who I met here at the Palm Beach Poetry Fest years ago. We wrote in the Japanese tanka form, which is 5 lines, following a syllabic count of 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. And I wanted to share some of this experiment with you, which I continued for 30 days, but don't worry, I won't read 30 days worth of poems. I just excerpted 9 short parts from this series, and there are 5 lines for each day. The self-isolation pages. Day 3. One day I could end my sentences. The next. Today, the gray dove struts on the fence, unfolds a note to the wind. Day 9. On the 9th day, rain. The hawk on the tower tucks beak to chest, almond speck in the storm's milky froth, a seed scheming its rebirth. Day 14. The fog unpeels from the hills, a blankness withdrawn, as if God inhaled. How the body ebbs and flows. All breath returns to the sea. Day 19. A bird cries into the sycamore. The mist unrolls a blank sheet on my list of failures. Start over, under, where you are. Day 20. What do we make of this blankness? The mist's embrace erases the hills once more. My dog's nose piercing the haze. I pick up the pen. Day 22. I'm learning to breathe again. The hawk doesn't ask which way the wind blows before plunging from its height. I renew my vows to air. Day 28. My hair thinned that year, as if my mother resolved to bear the lost locks to the next world, as mothers preserve a newborn's first curl. Day 29. Through a clear window, sun like honey lacquering the canyon's wide cup. I try the lock, step into warmth. The door was never shut. Day 30. One pomegranate, the last of this hazed season, heavy in my palm, blushing, ripe, jauntily crowned, untouched by birds or rain. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's have a round of applause for our poets. Thank you, Angela. So beautiful. And all of you.